Have you ever wondered what happens when your dreams clash with reality? What if the love you imagined isn't who they seem to be? Can innocence survive betrayal and deception? How fragile is the heart when illusions are shattered? And what secrets lie behind the delicate facade of Sylph Etherege? Join Classic Storytime Hub as we explore Sylph Etherege by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a reimagined classic tale where fantasy and reality collide in the most unexpected ways. A golden summer evening bathed the garden in warm light, yet in the shadowed shrubbery 2 figures waited, silent and watchful. Their eyes were fixed on a young girl perched in the window seat of the mansion across the lawn. The first, a man named Edward Hamilton, was striking in his subtle way, youthful, sharp, and unmistakably cultivated, though his appearance carried a hint of menace beneath the refinement. His eyes gleamed with a curious mix of amusement and calculation as he extended a long finger toward the girl, as if she were a puppet dancing to his unseen command. "The charm is working," he whispered, low and deliberate, almost as if speaking aloud would break the spell. Beside him, a woman leaned closer, her voice laced with both caution and intrigue. "Edward, since you insist on that name," she said, "do you realize how far you're going? I feel the urge to stop this before it goes too far. What if the lesson is too harsh for her delicate nature? Perhaps breaking her illusions would strengthen her in the long run. But she is so fragile. And Edward, are you not risking your own chance by conjuring this phantom rival?" Hamilton's grin was thin, unyielding. "Fear not," he replied. "She will vanish at my command. Let the charm unfold. Let it play out exactly as it must." And there she sat, an ethereal figure bathed in the last blush of sunset, framed by heavy silken curtains. Her slender form seemed almost unreal, as if plucked from the imagination of an artist before any brush had dared touch the canvas. In her hands she held a tiny miniature, encased in white satin and deep red leather, gazing at it with a quiet concentration that seemed to defy the world outside her window. Yet to Edward Hamilton this innocent act was anything but harmless. The smile that played across his lips was one of cunning and subtle malice. He watched, enraptured, as if the girl's very presence confirmed the power of the unseen spell he had woven, a spell that was only beginning to reveal its effects. "The charm is working," he whispered again, his voice barely above the rustle of the evening breeze. "Our sweet Sylvia's scorn will taste the retribution it deserves." At that very instant, Sylvia lifted her eyes, and instead of the familiar image she expected in the miniature, her gaze fell upon the shadowy figure of Edward Hamilton, stepping deliberately from the darkened shrubbery. Sylvia Etherege, an orphan raised in quiet isolation, had spent nearly her entire life under the watchful eye of a reclusive uncle. Until recently, her world had been one of carefully measured seclusion, a world in which she alone gave shape to her own thoughts and dreams. From the moment she was a cradle-bound infant, a future had been carefully arranged for her, a union with a distant cousin, a match designed not for passion, but to bind 2 estates together. The young Edgar Vaughan, her betrothed, had grown up across the ocean in Europe, and not once in his life had he seen the girl whose hand and heart were promised to him. Years of letters had forged a delicate intellectual intimacy, though the letters could never fully capture the nuances of each other's hearts or minds. They knew one another as one knows a half-glimpsed reflection, a beauty and character perceived but never truly grasped. Sylvia herself was a creature of sensitivity and imagination, The walls of her guardian's house had shut her out from the bustling life of the world, leaving her to wander through the vivid landscapes of her own mind. There she found companions among the echoes of long-dead poets, and voices shaped by her own thoughts and fancies. In that secluded realm, her friends were often invisible, her conversations often silent, and her laughter an intimate secret shared only with the shadows of her imagination. The companion Sylvia most often conjured in her private reveries was none other than her distant cousin, the one whose name and image had quietly inhabited her earliest thoughts. In her imagination, Edgar Vaughan became more than just a figure on paper. She painted him with vivid colors and delicate perfections, far surpassing anything a mere memory of fancy could offer. In her mind, no real rival could ever hope to measure up. To this ethereal presence, Sylvia gave her loyalty and her heart. When he hovered beside her in imagined walks or lingered silently in the corners of her favorite rooms, the solitude of her life transformed into a quiet joy. She loved, yet her innocence remained untouched, untainted by the worldly experience that a real lover might have brought. Even from afar, Edgar Vaughan seemed to understand her fully. His letters spoke to her as if he knew the very rhythm of her soul. He called her Sylph, a name perfectly suited to her sensitive spirit, her delicate manners, and the airy grace of both mind and body. In those letters, she was no longer just Sylvia Etherege. She became his cherished Sylph, a vision of idealized beauty and innocence that only existed in the world of imagination. At 17, the secluded life that had shaped her was abruptly altered by the death of her guardian. Sylvia passed into the care of Mrs. Grosvenor, a distant yet wealthy relative whose home was a realm of fashion, wealth, and social expectation. Even within this new world, Sylvia clung to the habits of her seclusion, wary of too much closeness or intrusion. Yet, in the quiet moments, she remained faithful to her cousin, or rather to the shadow of him she had brought to life, her ever-present Sylph, her invisible companion through a lonely but enchanted youth. The time was approaching when Edgar Vaughan, having completed his education through years of travel and study abroad, would finally return to the land of his birth. By his side, a companion named Edward Hamilton had already crossed the Atlantic, entrusted with letters for Mrs. Grosvenor and Sylvia Etherege. His arrival was greeted with courtesy and warmth, but Sylvia's reception was far from enthusiastic. There was no reason she could name, not a single fault in Hamilton's conduct or character, yet instinct alone filled her with unease and subtle aversion. Hamilton was far from handsome. His appearance could unsettle a first impression, but his polish, manners, and the sharp intellect flickering through his dark, sallow features gave him a compelling, if disquieting, presence. To everyone else, he seemed a charming, even remarkable visitor, and Mrs. Grosvenor welcomed him with open arms, hoping her ward's coldness might yield to reason. But Sylvia was immovable. The moment Edward Hamilton entered her presence, her natural warmth withdrew. Shyness overtook her, and a quiet distance settled between them, as though an invisible cloud had dimmed the sunlight of her character. Hamilton, perceptive and cunning, needed only a glance to read her emotions. Each flicker of discomfort, each fleeting sign of repulsion did not escape him, and whenever he detected it, a faint, almost imperceptible smile would cross his lips, a smile that carried amusement, calculation, and something darker, a spark of mockery and malice. Those who later recalled Edward Hamilton's face could not help but remember that shadowed expression, lingering like smoke at the edge of memory, coloring every recollection with its subtle menace. A few weeks after Hamilton's arrival, he presented Sylvia with a miniature of her cousin, delayed, he explained, only because it had been held up with part of his luggage. This tiny portrait was the very one that had captured her gaze so entirely at the opening of our story, drawing her into hours of silent reverie. For Sylvia, such deep absorption was no rarity. Shy and contemplative, she often lost herself in thoughts far removed from the immediate world. And yet, this particular miniature was something extraordinary. The face it bore seemed almost too perfect, too luminous for any human being born of a world that wears down even the brightest souls. It was a visage that had somehow escaped the ordinary trials of life, a countenance that might never wrinkle or fade, untainted by age or care. Sylvia felt a pang of unease. Could such a refined, radiant figure ever love a simple, secluded girl like herself? And yet, in that very same instant, she recognized in the miniature a masculine reflection of her own delicate, ethereal beauty, the kind of mirror-like resemblance that lovers, bound by destiny, are said to share. Perhaps it was the blood they had in common, or perhaps some silent hand of fate. The eyes of the painted cousin seemed to smile knowingly at her, as though they could read her thoughts, as if he had always understood the secret chambers of her heart. Sylvia could only conclude that her daydreams had, in some uncanny way, anticipated this reality, shaping her imagination to match the true likeness of the distant lover she had never seen. And now, with the miniature before her, those daydreams could take on life itself. Her imagination, once untethered and fragile, now guided by the very image of the man who would come to occupy both her mind and her heart. Clutching the miniature close to her heart, Sylvia could summon from the secret chamber of her imagination a shadow almost alive, her vision of Edgar Vaughan, walking with her beneath the moonlit garden. Even in the bright noon, the figure lingered at her side, sitting with her in the arbor where shafts of sunlight scattered like gold through the dappled shade. The effect was as vivid as any real encounter. Though she knew it was a creation of her own mind, the sensation felt no less tangible than if she had heard his whispered vows and returned them in kind. Those luminous eyes seemed to gaze straight into her soul, filling her with a rapture so deep that any fleeting intrusion of reality, a sound, a shadow, a thought, could shatter the spell, leaving her restless and longing. She heard in that imagined presence the melody of his voice, every word perfectly harmonizing with the unspoken music of her own heart. Oh, happy yet tragic girl, to fashion the perfect companion, to imbue him with every charm her heart craved, and then to drift hand in hand through the silvered realm of fantasy and moonlight where his kindred spirit waited. In that enchanted domain, earth seemed dull, dim, and distant. She wandered in a world that welcomed her spirit, where every thought and feeling felt at home. Many in their youth have visited such a land of dreams, lingering so long in its enchanted groves that when they are forced to return, the ordinary world feels like a cold exile, empty and gray in comparison to the luminous kingdom they have left behind. The dark-browed Edward Hamilton moved through Sylvia's world like a shadowy intruder, a villain slipping through the edges of her dreamlike romance. At the very height of her rapture, when the miniature's image floated most vividly in the air, it would suddenly shift, darken, and transform into his face. And always, in that instant, his signature smile would haunt the vision, twisting the beauty of her imagined lover into something sly and unsettling. As summer waned, news arrived. Edgar Vaughan had returned from France. That very evening, Sylvia would meet him for the first time, the man she had loved from afar for countless years. Words cannot capture how often she studied the miniature in preparation, tracing every contour as if memorizing him by touch, her heart trembling with the anticipation of greeting the reality behind her dreams. As twilight deepened, Sylvia sat with Mrs. Grosvenor in a quiet inner room, the only light coming from a distant alabaster lamp, casting a soft golden glow across the space. Never had Sylph Etherege appeared so ethereal. She had communed with a being of imagination for so long that her own beauty seemed woven from a delicate, dreamy fancy. Every subtle quiver of her spirit betrayed itself in her posture. She strained to catch every distant sound, the clatter of wheels, the echo of footsteps along the pavement, and in her mind even the whispering breeze carried the approach of her long-awaited lover, as if he moved upon the very air around her. Mrs. Grosvenor, watching Sylvia's quivering composure, felt her own heart tighten. She was about to speak when the sudden opening of the street door froze her words. Confident footsteps climbed the staircase, each one echoing with certainty, until a presence entered the drawing room. From their secluded vantage on the inner sofa, neither Sylvia nor Mrs. Grosvenor could immediately see who it was. "Sylph!" a voice rang out, rich with warmth and intimacy. "Dearest Sylph, sweet Sylph Etherege, here is your Edgar Vaughan." Sylvia did not rise, she did not answer. Instead, her fingers clutched Mrs. Grosvenor's arm, her body trembling violently as her heart throbbed like a drum. Who is it?" she gasped, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Who calls me Sylph?" Before Mrs. Grosvenor could respond, the stranger stepped into the light, carrying the lamp. And there, standing before them, illuminated in its soft glow, was Edward Hamilton, his dark features twisted by that insidious, mocking smile that had haunted Sylvia's imagination from the very beginning. "Isn't the miniature an admirable likeness?" he asked, his tone almost casual, yet every word dripped with menace. Sylvia's blood ran cold. She could not look away. Her hands loosened, and the precious miniature she had held fell to the floor. Hamilton, or Vaughan, she could not be certain in that moment, pressed his foot upon it, crushing the delicate ivory portrait into fragments. The echo of its destruction seemed to reverberate through the room as if it had shattered the very air around her. "There, my sweet Sylph," the man exclaimed, his voice both triumphant and sharp. "It was I who shaped your phantom lover, and now I destroy him. Your dream is shattered. Awake, Sylph Etherege, awake to the truth. I am the only Edgar Vaughan." Mrs. Grosvenor, alarmed, caught Sylvia in her arms, her voice trembling with concern. "We have gone too far, Edgar Vaughan," she said. The strange scheme, born of Vaughan's wounded pride and sanctioned by Mrs. Grosvenor in the hope of curing Sylvia's romantic illusions, now seemed to border on cruelty. "Look at the poor child," she continued. "I tremble for what might come of this." Vaughan only smiled, a thin, knowing curl of his lips as he cast the lamp's warm glow across Sylvia's pale, closed eyes. "Indeed, madam," he said, almost mockingly, "my conscience is clear. I merely looked into her tender heart, and from the pure fantasies I found there, I fashioned a man, an illusion that led her into Shadowland, and it vanished, as all shadows do. There is nothing new in this. Many a sweet young girl has wandered there before, lost in dreams that seemed all too real." As Sylvia's heartbeat began to return, Mrs. Grosvenor stepped closer, firm and resolute. "Now, Edgar Vaughan," she said, "try in earnest to win back her love from the phantom you conjured. If you succeed, she will carry the lesson with her all her life, and it will make her stronger." The result of that peculiar trial revealed itself in the story's closing scene. It became known throughout society that Edgar Vaughan had returned from France. Under the assumed name of Edward Hamilton, he had, with quiet cunning, won the heart of the lovely girl to whom he had been betrothed in childhood, his Sylph Etherege, now awakened to reality, yet forever shaped by the strange, dreamlike journey that had prepared her heart for true love. The wedding was fast approaching, yet one evening before the day of bliss arrived, Edgar Vaughan entered Mrs. Grosvenor's drawing room. There he found the lady and his sylph, Sylvia Etherege. "Were it not for Sylvia's patience," Mrs. Grosvenor murmured, her eyes flicking anxiously to the girl, "I should fear that city life is harming her delicate constitution. She was always fragile, but now, look at her. She is scarcely of this world, a mere wisp of existence. Have you ever seen anything so ethereal?" Vaughan's gaze was already fixed on Sylvia, who sat in a shadowed recess, moonlight spilling through the window to touch her like a caress. Her dreamy eyes locked onto his, and the sway of a tree branch outside sometimes cloaked her in shadow, making her seem to dissolve into the gloom, half vanished, half illuminated. "Yes," he said softly, almost to himself, "I can scarcely call her of the earth. No wonder I named her Sylph. She seems destined to melt into the moonlight streaming through this window, or perhaps in the open air she might drift away on the breeze, a wreath of mist." Sylvia's eyes sparkled with a light that seemed almost otherworldly. She raised her hand in a delicate, triumphant gesture. "Farewell," she whispered, her voice like a soft chime in the still room. "I will neither dissolve into the moonlight nor vanish upon the breeze, yet you cannot hold me here." There was something in her tone, in the intensity of her gaze, that filled Mrs. Grosvenor with a sudden, terrible apprehension. But before she could move toward the girl, Vaughan's hand restrained her. "Wait," he cried, a strange mixture of mockery and anguish in his voice. "Can it be? Our sweet Sylph is drifting heavenward to seek the original of the miniature?"
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.